So, you are a young man that's growing up. So I get to this country from England, and I live at Regent Park, at Belshaw Place, then move from there to a place called Scarborough in the Gilder Drive. So those of us from the ghetto. And then, become law and things of that sort. But the main thing that's important for me is how we were raised. So we were raised not to get somewhere and then not bring people with us. So my cousin is here, and so she knows that in my house, in our apartment at 51 Gilder Drive, apartment 101 M1K4P7, that there were times when we didn't even have proper chairs. So my uncle had a Cadillac Seville that my mom got in an accident with, and we took the chairs out of it and put them in our house. So I used to watch television with an armrest. So that's my background. So, sometimes we say judges are this and they're that, and, so judging is good, but those things don't necessarily matter to me as much as the fact that there are times when you are young that you have no voice. So when we live in these neighborhoods, we have no voice. We're just trying to get along to get along. So because of that, it always infuses everything that I tend to do. So here we are now, and there is a young woman last year that gets shot. When she got shot, she was pregnant. So she died, and the baby died. Then there were a rash of shootings that had taken place, some that we knew about, people that we knew, people from the neighborhood, and there's a guy, so we have funny names. There was a guy named Drunk Already. And so, because it didn't matter what time of the day, he was drunk already. So we call him Drunk Already. So you see him at 12 o'clock, drunk already. So you have all of this. These people are getting shot, some are getting killed. And so as a presiding judge, but still someone with that background, I decided to call a meeting. And this is important just so people understand the context of how we get here. So what happens is I call 37 people, some I know, some I don't know, names that I've gotten. So if people were not on that list, it's not because you were being shunned or anything of that sort. It's just because I didn't know you, or I didn't know you enough to trust you. So sitting as a sitting judge would mean that if I brought someone there that I didn't know or didn't trust, you could compromise my money, my people. So I have to make sure that I can understand who's going to be in that room. So then we're there, a series of people that are there, and then we have this conversation. As a result of the conversation, which is dealing only with Toronto, so we're trying to figure out what's going on here, why people keep getting shot. In that meeting, we have 13 areas of concern, from poverty to education, mental health, all of these things, and then a working group gets struck. That working group that gets struck has a series of individuals on it that are experts in these various areas. So we're not all experts in everything, so you have to bring the experts in those areas. So Sharon is there, persons from corrections are there. So it's not, some people said that was very elitist, but we had people that were in that room that had been in jail for 8 years. So they were the best people to tell us about corrections. So we then narrowed those 13 areas down to education, mental health, corrections. Those areas then formed a working group. After forming that working group, we then put together this paper. The paper then became, it's funny, you can call a paper just a paper, and people are like, oh, it's a nice paper. But if you call it the National White Paper on Black People, people start to take notice. So I called it the National Working Paper on the Journey, Ambition. It was a long name, but enough for people to start answering phone calls. So then I call Marco Mendocino, who was a sitting MP at the time. He calls Adam Vaughan, and then Adam Vaughan calls Ahmed Hussein. Ahmed Hussein at the time is not in cabinet. He's simply an MP. So as a result of that conversation with him, we then have a conversation that lasts hours. And then as a result of that conversation, I then fly to Ottawa. So I meet with Ralph Goodale, I meet with other individuals, and yes, this is something different for someone that's a judge, because judges aren't necessarily expected to do that. But I'm also a judge from a neighborhood that most people are not from. So then it's also incumbent upon us to ensure that no matter where you are in life, how far you think you've gotten, that in reality you should know that you are nowhere. So I am a spiritual person, so I can say that one of the things that the Bible says is that God was a man of no reputation. So sometimes we put reputation above where we are. So then as a result of doing that, we then again, learning how we've learned, growing up how we've grown up, decide that what we are going to do is we are going to start speaking to these people. As we're educating them on what we have learned, speaking not for the black community because we can't, but speaking for a group of individuals that are saying that there's a problem, we begin to gain traction. Then eventually what happens is Ahmed Hussein goes into cabinet. He then becomes a citizenship minister, and as a result of that conversation, he calls me on the day that he gets sworn in to say that I'm still behind this. So he doesn't leave from us. He actually says, I'm still behind this initiative. Calling on the day, letting us know that he's behind it is very important. So then as a result of that, we then leave from there, start having more conversations. Eventually, I get a phone call that says they only think this is Toronto-based. Because they think this is Toronto-based, they need to have a national organization. So then I start making phone calls that are national. So I call friends of mine that are in different areas in Nova Scotia, in Alberta, people that I've met or that I know, and those people begin to contact me, and then now we become a national organization. So then we come up with the name, the Federation of Black Canadians. So now the Federation of Black Canadians begins now to start liaisoning with the government, because we're teaching them, we're not lobbying them. And I think this is a paradigm shift. I'm not coming there to beg you things. I'm telling you what's wrong. We're letting you know where the issues are, where the gaps are. We didn't come here to shake your hand so that we could say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to make sure that we're behind you next time around. We're coming to tell you what's wrong based on what we have seen. So as a result of those conversations, we get a conversation with Michael Butts, or Gerald Butts. I didn't know who he was at the time, and so I will be clear here. I do not want to be a politician. That is not my aim. I like my job. So sometimes we think that what's going to happen is that it's going to allow you to become the minister of something. I don't want to be the minister of anything. I'm okay with what God's given me. So it's not an opportunity for me to get into another position so that I can run for something, and then I don't want to do that. That's not the calling that was on me. So we then have this conversation with Gerald Butts. There are now 15 or so people that are in the room with him. We have it at Ryerson. When we have this discussion, it's done very well. I must be honest, those people that were there were professional. We had a deck that was done. We had communications that had started now working with the Federation to be able to generate what we were doing. Gerald Butts then says, this is the best presentation that he's seen in months. And he's going to tell the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister is going to meet with us. So, of course, I say to him, look, you can't, I told this to the Quebec people, I said, you can't tell these black people that the Prime Minister is coming and then he doesn't come. So him and I are in the elevator, and I'm saying, you can't just, look, that sounds great, but if you don't do this, our reputations are on the line. And Gerald, to his credit, said that my reputation's on the line as well. So then that was in May, and then we had a meeting with the Prime Minister in June. The meeting that we have in June, we now, knowing that we want to make sure that we are national, so we start the meeting in French, because we want to make sure that it's understood that we are a national organization. But we also start by recognizing the distinctiveness of our community, which comes out of Nova Scotia. So we let the Prime Minister know that Nova Scotia, where we are concerned, is a very important aspect in the black community in this country. We then speak, yes. Yeah. Oh, he is? See, I didn't even know that. So Gerald Butts is also Nova Scotian, so I didn't even know that. So we do that, and then we put up a deck, which is now communicating with the Prime Minister the issues around the decade, corrections, mental health, the same things that we had done for Gerald Butts. We last over an hour to have that conversation with him. It's in a room, it's just us and just him, with many staffers. The Black Caucus is also there, and then we continue this discussion. But we let them know that we're not just expecting to talk. We have to have action. So there were many actions that were requests that were asked of the government that encompass mental health, corrections, education, and the decade. So you'll hear that in the video that the Prime Minister gave, when we knew that he wasn't going to be here, the request was that we need to know if you can do a video. And he said that he would. And in that video, you hear him starting to talk about the decade. So the conversation that wasn't there before has now been pushed. And I think part of that is because there is an organization. This country has become smaller where Black people are concerned. We've been in this room with people from Vancouver, Alberta, Toronto, Ottawa, Nova Scotia. We've been rubbing shoulders with bilingual, francophones. I'm sure I'm missing places. Quebec, but London, Ontario. That's all right, brother. I told him that, since Monday he sits in the same place. It's like this is where he is at church. He has his own seat. So what happens now is we have now become this national organization. We are now doing our best to ensure that we are addressing the concerns. So as I'd said before, I feel that it is important for us to know that Toronto is not the center of the universe. And I actually think that we all believe that. So if we don't, then we should. But one of the things that the Federation has done is that the address of the Federation is not in Toronto. It's in Nova Scotia. So the registration of the Federation of Black Canadians is in Nova Scotia with an address that should be attributed to the Black Cultural Center that's there. The reason for that is that we have to be purposeful and intentional in all of the things that we do and how we do them. So I know that there were times when people were wondering whether or not how this federation had come about. That is how it came about. So no, it wasn't this calculated way to exclude community organizations because those organizations we had aught with. It's not that. It may simply be that I didn't know you, or we didn't know that person, or we didn't have an opportunity to get to know them. But the idea now with this, so the day or 2 days before we meet with the Prime Minister, I have a meeting with Peter Flegel from the foundation. And at that meeting, we then talk about, or he tells me about this Toronto Reference Library initiative and how the foundation wants to do something like this. So what we do at that point on that day in that meeting on a napkin is decided that the Federation and the foundation will join forces. Because I also believe that we have to be more inclusive than exclusive. So if we're all doing things towards the same common good, then we should continue to do that. So we partner up. And in partnering up, we then start to build a capacity for this. Peter Flegel is a wonderful fellow. I will say this, and we should give him a hand clap. I've enjoyed working with him every single moment that we've been able to sort of pair up and figure out things to be done with respect to this. We're very respectful of each other's position, not our jobs, but more what one can do versus what the other can do. So there are things that Peter does better than me, and there's things that I do better than him. And so we're able to make sure that we join ourselves in such a way that we're not stepping on each other's toes. But in doing that, this then comes about. Now, when we talk about the capacity, we had 800 people register. We can only serve in the food and the facilities only serve so many people. So in reality, we couldn't actually open this up to way more than 800 when we were only starting with 450. So this room only holds 450 people. So when you were doing your line dance in here, that's why it was tight. So what happens now is that we have joined forces here. So I have been to, in conversations with Alberta, with Edmonton. I've been, so Alberta on the whole, but Calgary, Edmonton have been in conversations with us. Quebec, I'd gone to Quebec to have a meeting. I'd flown to Nova Scotia to have a meeting. I'd gone to Ottawa to have a meeting. We are now due to have a meeting here in Toronto, which is to be done in January. We're just trying to find the date. The idea is that to make sure that in each province, what would happen is that we would be, there would be a coalition in each of those provinces. But what I've learned is that there's a lot of hurt in our community. So we hurt a lot. And you know, you can't be beaten down for so long and expect that you could just stand right back up again. And so sometimes when we're in these meetings, we realize that there's a lot of hurt that has to come out first. And so sometimes you can actually hear that hurt even in the plenaries. You can hear the person saying, we've done this before. Why are we doing this? How many times are we going to do this? What's going to happen here? Why should we do this again, knowing that I've been doing this for 20 years? So, but yet, the one thing that I've heard is that we're tired. And I believe that. But in our fatigue, we must still fight. We must still get ourselves. So although we're tired, there may very well be a moment right now, not because of the people that are leading this, it is not that, but because that the season might be right. The moment may very well just have opened up to allow us an opportunity to be able to walk through. It has nothing to do with the steering committee, with myself. It doesn't have anything to do with that, because clearly there are others that have come before with organizations very similar. So just so that we know, Howard McCurdy had started an organization called MBCC in 1969. It's the exact same organization as this. In fact, you will see when we launch it here that they had 3 words as their tagline, and we have 3 words as our tagline. So yes, in respect of our ancestors and elders, I spoke to Howard McCurdy. I called him to let him know what we're intending on doing. I asked him for his advice. I spoke to Jean, who was also a part of it, Jean Augustine. I spoke to Juanita Westmoreland, who was also a part of it. Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard, who was also a part of it. Because I also believe that our elders have much to teach us. And that it's not a situation where we're simply just came up and we know everything. Like I say to my son, just because he could fix my computer doesn't mean he could pay his mortgage. So I pay this mortgage, you fix this computer. But you're 14, so you're not grown yet. So just the same principle, which is that we have not arrived at a place when our elders would know yet still more than us. So what is there is to make sure that we had the blessing of them, that we were not someone that was forging ahead, an organization forging, thinking that what we're doing is the best interest of us because it came about us from us. It's not. It came from persons before us. So what we're going to do is so there's a website that we are going to launch. This organization is one that has been able to start to rally the troops. We all have the same vision. So what will happen is all of these things that have been done at the plenaries will then be put together. Once they're put together, then they will form now the next mandate that the Federation has to take to the government in an attempt to be able to teach them. So it's a non-partisan organization. So when you saw Jagmeet Singh up here, he knows what the deck says. When you see all of these individuals, you're able to then know that they know more about this organization because the expectation is that they should all be able to come on board with what it is that's been ailing our community for so long. So one of the things that we will ask at some point is that all of these organizations, all of the people that are here, begin to flood that website. Tell people about the website. Why? Because I think we start to build critical mass. So if there's 1.2 million of us, as we learned from the video from Afro Global, and thank you to Afro Global for that, and Moses and his team, and Patricia. As it says, we are the second highest racialized community in Canada. Then that means we are powerful. And it does mean that. So if we as a community can come together, which we have, which we are, rally around ourselves, start to get the word out about the Federation. Not because the Federation is the end-all and be-all, and again, we will not and cannot speak for all of the complexities of the communities that are in this country. We're just trying to do our best with the information that we know to be able to rally the governments around these particular issues. You will see that the way that the structure of it goes, and Richard will come up to tell you about the site itself. The organization, as we sit here, it says that I'm the chair of the steering committee. I'm not the chair of the Federation of Black Canadians, because then it would mean that I would have come here and we would have been a fait accompli. The reality is that this steering committee is of the understanding that we are simply putting this together. The provinces will elect their chairs. The chair of the province will then sit on the Federation of Black Canadians as a representative of that province. So the bylaws, the governance, the donations, all of those things are things that are going to be done in such a way that it's not something that we simply came to you telling you this is what it is, but rather the organizations and the provinces will organize themselves so that you have federal representation by the Federation, but by organizing yourselves, you now have provincial representation within your province that can now advocate provincially and municipally. So that's one of the things that becomes important. When we galvanize ourselves in this way, we give ourselves an opportunity to not only be heard, but to be listened to such a way that you now have consequences if you do not listen to the things we're asking. So when I said nothing about us without us, I'm serious about that. No longer should someone be able to talk about us who doesn't know about us, who's not been where we are. So we have much more left to discuss and figure out, but at least we know that the template is there. So there are other provinces that I am going to go to, and just so that we know, and I think because sometimes money becomes important, what happens is if I go somewhere, I pay for it. So I don't say to myself, okay, look, there's money now in the Federation, so I'm going to take that money and I'm going to use that money to go somewhere, because I don't think that's a good steward of our money. But rather, this is simply my sowing into a cause that I think is very important, so that we make sure that we're always good stewards. So